38 years on this bench, and I have seen arrogance in every form it takes. The kind that does not apologize for itself, does not try to dress itself up, does not bother hiding behind a polite smile. The kind that walks through my courtroom doors with a smirk and an absolute bone-deep conviction that money is a shield, that influence is armor, that the rules everyone else lives by simply do not apply to certain categories of person. I have seen it from people who built fortunes and people who inherited them. I have seen it across every tax bracket and every neighborhood. After nearly 4 decades, I believed I had encountered every version of it there was. Then a woman named Veronica Sterling walked into my courtroom on a Tuesday morning and proved me wrong in ways I will carry for the rest of my life. The charge on the docket was failure to yield to emergency vehicles, a traffic violation. On paper, the kind of matter that resolves in 15 minutes and is forgotten by lunch. In reality, the kind of matter that reveals everything about who a person is when the inconvenience of another human life intersects with the importance of their own schedule. Veronica Sterling was the wife of tech billionaire Marcus Sterling, whose company spanned 14 countries, employed 40,000 people, and generated revenue that placed it among the most powerful private enterprises on the eastern seaboard. His name appeared on buildings and donor walls and political fundraising lists across 3 states. Veronica arrived in my courtroom the way I imagine she arrived everywhere, as though the space had been assembled for her entrance and everyone already in it was part of the scenery. The Hermes handbag, the diamond necklace, scattering morning light across the gallery walls, the posture of someone who had not waited in a line or been told to sit down in longer than she could remember. She surveyed the room the way a developer surveys land before demolition. Every person in it registered briefly as beneath her notice and was promptly dismissed. Let me be direct about something. I am not dazzled by wealth. What has always impressed me across every case I have heard is conduct. How a person treats the people around them who cannot push back. How a person behaves when they believe no one important is watching. Veronica Sterling was about to give me a comprehensive education in the complete and total absence of all 3. Mrs. Sterling, I said, you are charged with failure to yield to emergency vehicles, specifically blocking an ambulance during an active emergency response. How do you plead? She did not stand properly. She did not address the court appropriately. She leaned back in her chair with the practiced ease of someone for whom inconvenience had been so thoroughly eliminated from daily life that the concept had become almost theoretical. Your Honor, she said, her tone carrying the particular flavor of condescension that comes not from cruelty, but from genuine, unquestioned belief in one's own superiority. I think there has been a misunderstanding. I was conducting important business and did not notice the commotion behind me. I am certain we can resolve this quietly and efficiently. Commotion. That word landed in the room like a stone in still water. She had just described a man fighting for his life in the back of an ambulance, paramedics working against the clock, sirens blazing through the street as commotion, background noise, an inconvenient disturbance in the vicinity of something more important. I have heard a great many things across 38 years in this room. But that word, used to describe what happened to Michael Torres, told me everything I needed to know about Veronica Sterling before we had properly begun. Mrs. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice level, the ambulance was transporting a 62-year-old man suffering a heart attack. The paramedics had their sirens and emergency lights fully engaged. According to testimony, you not only refused to move your vehicle, you exited it and verbally confronted the paramedics who were pleading with you to clear the road. She tapped her fingers against the handbag slowly, performing boredom for an audience she had already decided was beneath engagement. Your Honor, she said, I receive hundreds of important calls every day. My husband's company spans 14 countries. The decisions I manage on any given morning affect global markets, supply chains, and thousands of jobs. When I am in the middle of managing that kind of responsibility, I cannot be expected to drop everything because a government vehicle wants me to move. Surely you can understand that. And besides, she continued with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once considered being wrong. If it was truly an emergency, they could have gone around me. Providence has alternate routes. It is not my responsibility to solve the logistical challenges of emergency services. That is what their training is for. I have thought about that sentence many times since that morning. It is not my responsibility to solve their logistical challenges. A man is dying. Paramedics are begging you to move your car, and your considered, articulate, unapologetic position is that the problem belongs to them, the gallery murmured. The court reporter paused. Veronica Sterling had just blamed trained paramedics for failing to navigate around her criminal obstruction of a life-saving vehicle. Mrs. Sterling, I said, Michael Torres suffered permanent cardiac damage as a direct result of the 4-minute delay your actions caused. His physicians have confirmed in writing that those 4 minutes represented the critical window between meaningful recovery and the permanent disability he now lives with every day. Do you understand the human cost of what you did? For the first time, something shifted behind her eyes. Not remorse, not shame, irritation. The irritation of a person being asked to take responsibility for something they have already decided is not their concern. Your Honor, she said, heart attacks happen. People get sick. That is a fact of life, not a consequence of my actions. I was conducting legitimate business in a legal vehicle on a public road. If emergency services cannot efficiently navigate around private citizens going about their daily lives, that is a systemic failure of their infrastructure, not a violation of any law I am aware of. 3 sentences delivered with perfect composure about a man's permanent disability, about a life permanently diminished, about 4 minutes that could have been given freely and were instead withheld because a phone call felt more important than a heartbeat. The courtroom did not just go quiet, it went still. The particular stillness that follows something that cannot be unsaid. And then, because what I had heard was apparently only the opening act, Veronica Sterling stood up. She rose with the unhurried authority of someone who has never once doubted their right to command a room. She smoothed her jacket, adjusted the strap of the handbag, and walked toward my bench, her heels striking the floor in a slow, deliberate rhythm that reminded me absurdly of a countdown. Your Honor, she said, I think we should address the real issue at the center of this proceeding. My family's foundation has donated $20 million to Rhode Island hospitals over the past decade. My family's tax contributions fund a substantial portion of this city's emergency infrastructure. You are holding me accountable for what you are calling an obstruction while completely ignoring the fact that my family's generosity is a significant reason these emergency services exist and operate at all. She looked around my courtroom slowly, taking in every face with the particular brand of disdain that does not bother to conceal itself because it genuinely cannot conceive of any reason why it should. Then she said the thing that I knew, the moment I heard it, would define everything that came next. With respect, Your Honor, she said, and I want you to notice that phrase, because in my experience, nothing that follows with respect has ever been respectful. You have spent your career in this little courtroom handling small problems for small people. I have built a global empire. I think it is fair to say I have a considerably better understanding of priorities than someone who has never created anything significant, never employed anyone, never been responsible for anything larger than municipal parking violations and neighborhood disputes. She paused. Then she delivered the final blow, the one that sealed her fate as completely as anything I have witnessed in 38 years. Some people matter more than others. Some work is more important than other work. And some of us, whether it is comfortable to say so or not, are simply more valuable to society than others. So yes, I blocked traffic for 4 minutes while conducting business that affects more lives than you will see in this courtroom over the course of your entire career. And no, I do not feel bad about it, not even slightly. The silence that followed was the deepest I have experienced in a courtroom. Not a murmur, not a breath. The court reporter's hands were motionless. The bailiff was completely still. Every person in the gallery was frozen in the specific paralysis of witnessing something that defies immediate comprehension. Veronica Sterling had just stood in a court of law and declared herself more valuable than a heart attack victim, superior to the paramedics who had begged her to move, above the justice system, beyond accountability, fundamentally better in some way she did not feel any need to justify than every other person in the room. In 38 years, I have worked to maintain the composure this bench demands. I believe in measured responses. I believe a judge's power is most effective when it is precise and controlled. I have sat across from people who lied to my face, who manipulated evidence, who showed contempt for the process I have dedicated my life to, and I have handled every one of them with the equanimity my position requires. But there are rare moments when what you witness is so far beyond the ordinary failures of human character, so nakedly revealing of something broken in a person's soul, that composure becomes insufficient, when what is called for is not just a ruling, but a reckoning. This was one of those moments. I stood up slowly, with the full weight of 38 years behind every movement, and the room understood immediately that something significant was about to happen. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, and my voice was quiet because I have never needed volume to command a room. In 38 years on this bench, I have not encountered anything quite like what you have displayed here this morning. Not the violation, not the obstruction. What I will not soon forget is the breathtaking completeness of your disregard for human life, your contempt for the basic premise that every person in this room carries the same fundamental worth regardless of their bank balance. I walked around my bench. I eliminated the formal distance between judge and defendant because I wanted Veronica Sterling to understand she was not being addressed by a title or a robe. She was being addressed by a person who had spent nearly 4 decades ensuring that justice applied to everyone who walked through those doors. You asked me to understand priorities. Let me share what I understand after 38 years of watching human beings in their most unguarded moments. Michael Torres has spent 30 years building the homes and the office towers and the infrastructure that your empire depends on. He has done it with his hands and his back and his time, quietly and without fanfare. The paramedics you dismissed, the ones you blamed for their own inability to navigate around your illegal obstruction, save thousands of lives every year. They do it for salaries that would not cover a single month of your foundation's claimed charitable expenses. They do it at significant personal risk. They do it because they believe that every human life is worth saving, regardless of whose life it is. And justice, real justice, the kind that has kept this civilization functioning across centuries of human ambition and human failure, does not have a price tag. It cannot be donated into submission or bought off through political connections, however extensive those connections may be. Every single person in this courtroom, Mrs. Sterling, every person in this city whose life you affected with your choices this morning, carries the same inherent worth you claim exclusively for yourself. The construction worker recovering from permanent disability, the paramedics you blamed for your crimes, the people who built the roads your Bentley drives on, who staff the hospitals your foundation claims to support, who make possible in ways you have apparently never paused to consider every single thing you have and everything you enjoy. They all matter as much as you do. The transformation on her face was something I will carry for the rest of my life. Supreme confidence cracking in real time. The realization arriving devastatingly late that she had made a mistake she could not buy her way out of or instruct her lawyers to make disappear. I returned to my bench, and now I said, since you have chosen to make this about wealth and power and comparative worth, let me tell you what I found when I looked into the empire you are so proud of. Sterling Industries has been the subject of 17 federal investigations over the past 5 years. Environmental violations, worker safety violations, resulting in documented injuries to the very employees your husband claims to champion, tax avoidance schemes of considerable scale, and a documented pattern of using political influence to evade accountability for corporate misconduct. The Sterling Foundation, the foundation you invoked this morning as evidence of your contributions to this city, has been flagged by the IRS for charitable deductions claimed on donations that were never actually made. Your family has been receiving the full benefits of charitable giving while retaining the money. The generosity you described, the $20 million you told this courtroom funds emergency services across Rhode Island, was in significant part a fiction maintained for the benefit of your tax returns. And there is one more thing. 3 separate complaints have been filed against you in 3 separate jurisdictions for incidents materially identical to what brings you here today, each one quietly buried through political connections and legal pressure. Each time you learned the lesson that brought you here this morning, that wealth applied correctly purchases immunity. Today I said that immunity ends. For failure to yield to emergency vehicles resulting in life-threatening delays to a patient in active cardiac arrest, maximum fine of $5,000. For contempt of court and the publicly expressed disregard for human life you demonstrated in this proceeding, an additional $5,000. But those fines were the least of it. I directed that complete transcripts of everything Veronica Sterling had said in that courtroom, every word, in her own voice, be forwarded to the Internal Revenue Service, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the United States Department of Justice. Her admissions about operating above accountability would find a receptive audience. I directed that copies be sent to every major news organization in New England. The working people of this city whose lives she had weighed against a phone call and found wanting had an absolute right to know how someone of her influence viewed them. I ordered an immediate forensic audit of all Sterling Foundation charitable claims for the preceding 7 years. License suspended for 6 months. 200 hours of community service to be served working directly alongside emergency medical services personnel. The gavel came down. The sound of it echoed in a room that had gone completely, utterly still. Within hours, it was everywhere. The footage spread with the velocity reserved for moments that feel like something people have been waiting to see without knowing they were waiting. Her words, "Some people matter more than others," became a phrase recognized across the country and beyond it. A symbol of elite arrogance so perfectly expressed, it required no commentary. It explained itself. The federal investigations moved with a speed and thoroughness that spoke to how much material there was to work with. IRS auditors discovered the Sterling Foundation had claimed $40 million in charitable deductions for donations that existed only on paper. Shell company structures unraveled under examination, revealing decades of systematic tax evasion. The SEC investigation uncovered years of securities fraud and environmental cover-ups concealed through a network of political corruption. Federal prosecutors assembled evidence of bribery, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice stretching across 3 states. Marcus Sterling's empire collapsed within 6 months. Federal asset seizures froze hundreds of millions. Criminal indictments named both Marcus and Veronica as defendants on multiple counts. The $2 billion fortune that had purchased influence and immunity for decades was consumed by fines, forfeitures, and the accumulated cost of every accountability that money had previously been able to avoid. Michael Torres filed a civil lawsuit against the Sterling family for the permanent disability her actions had caused. The jury was composed of working people who understood from their own lives exactly what it meant to be dismissed as small and unimportant by people with more money than conscience. They awarded Torres $50 million. Veronica served her 200 hours alongside the same paramedics she had dismissed as incompetent government employees. She cleaned ambulances, restocked medical supplies, learned how equipment worked and why protocols existed and what emergency response looked like from the perspective of people performing it under pressure, in the dark, against the clock, for someone they had never met. She learned names and stories. She discovered that the paramedic who had begged her to move her car held a nursing degree and had served overseas before choosing this work because he wanted to keep saving lives. She and Michael Torres became, against every reasonable expectation, friends. On her final day of service, she came to see me privately. The woman who had walked into my courtroom like she owned it was gone. "Judge Judy," she said quietly, "I need to thank you, not for being lenient with me. You were not, and you were right not to be. I need to thank you for refusing to let me buy my way out of who I had become. I was a monster. I had built an entire architecture of justification around success and the comparative value of different kinds of work and different kinds of lives, and I had lived inside it so long I had stopped being able to see it clearly. She paused. Michael forgave me. I will never understand why, and I will never stop being grateful for it. He told me that holding on to anger at someone who has genuinely changed is a weight he did not want to carry, that he would rather spend whatever time he has left building something than destroying something. That is who Michael Torres is. That is the man whose life I decided mattered less than my phone call. Veronica served 18 months in federal prison for tax fraud and conspiracy charges. Upon release, she created a legitimate charitable foundation, properly audited and properly transparent, dedicated to supporting emergency medical services and helping working families navigate the financial devastation a medical emergency can produce. The Sterling Empire was gone. The buildings and donor walls and 14-country operation she had held up as evidence of her superior value to the world were gone. But something else was built in their place, something smaller and quieter and considerably more valuable. When people ask me, after all these years, which case I return to most when I think about why this work matters, I tell them about Veronica Sterling, not because I enjoyed watching an empire fall, though I will be honest. There was something deeply satisfying about watching the moment money ran out of road, not because I take pleasure in human suffering, but because I watched something happen in that courtroom and in the months that followed that I have always believed was possible and have not always had evidence to prove. I watched a human being who had completely lost their way find it again through accountability, through consequence, through the radical act of being forced to sit across from the people she had dismissed and actually look at them, to learn their names, to discover that the people she had declared small were in fact enormous in their commitment and their sacrifice and their capacity for forgiveness they had done nothing to deserve. That is what justice is for. Not only to punish, but to insist that actions carry consequences, to create the conditions for genuine growth, to remind the most powerful among us, consistently and regardless of what they drive or who they know or how many countries their empire spans, that they must answer for their choices when those choices harm others. Because every construction worker and every billionaire, every paramedic and every person in the back of an ambulance, every person who has ever walked through my courtroom doors, regardless of what they were wearing or what they were worth, they all matter equally. It is my job to make sure everyone who enters this room remembers that truth, especially the ones who walked in absolutely certain they were the exception,